Hello and welcome to Research with Al. I am the host of this podcast, Ali, or you can call me Al. Today we will be looking into recycling around the United States and its association with science communication. The reason that this became a topic of interest for me was because when I was in middle school, one random summer, I decided to take a deep dive into my local recycling campaigns and website. I remember I printed out an infographic I found on what to and what not to recycle and literally taped it onto my wall by my own little recycling bin in my room. I had basically forgotten about that deep dive until a few months ago, and the idea for this podcast came to life. The definition of recycling that I found from Wikipedia says, quote, the action or process of converting waste into reusable material, unquote. Side note, I know Wikipedia has a bad reputation in the academic world, but since I'm just using it for a definition, I think it's okay to use here. Recycling is used as a tactic to help the world reduce, reuse, recycle, a phrase that you have probably heard and seen a lot. It is helping combat environmental crises through science, through breaking different materials down and using that to create new items or new materials. I will be mostly focusing on more material recycling rather than things like organic waste with composting or other recycling topics. However, I will still be talking about composting a little bit. Recycling is done a bit differently throughout the United States, and even from city to city, it can be a vastly different process for citizens, which is why, for this research project, I focused on 3 campaigns for each region of the United States. One in each region I made sure was government run so that I would be able to compare the science communication concepts when done by companies or organizations to local governments. I am going to give a quick introduction to each of the campaigns that I looked at, and any information that I found online will be in the reference section in the description of this podcast. I will also be citing academic sources and quotes in the podcast. Starting in the West, we have Recycle Trailer Funding by Recycle Montana, which is a campaign about rewarding local high schools for using recycling trailers. Next, we have the Trash Talk series, which is done by the Utah Recycling Alliance and has ritual meetings surrounding reducing waste, recycling, and zero waste lifestyles. Then, Don't Ignite, Recycle Right by the Boulder County Hazardous Materials Management Facility, based in Colorado. They led a campaign to educate their citizens on what should and shouldn't be recycled at their facility, along with how to recycle at their facility. Now for the Southwest region, we have Taking Action on Plastic Waste by Recycle New Mexico. They created a video surrounding citizens' concerns on plastic pollution and education on recycling throughout the state. Next is Know What to Throw by the North Central Texas Council of Governments. They led a campaign to educate their residents on curbside recycling. Then, the Biggest Reducer campaign by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, which is a campaign of YouTube videos to educate the residents on correct recycling habits. Now, for the Midwest, we have Boss Your Toss from Iowa State University. They led a campaign to educate on recycling for Iowa State University and emphasized to students that it was an option they could use. Next is Keep It Clean Kansas by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Their campaign educates and promotes residents on recycling and recycling options within Kansas. In addition, there is the Let's Recycle Right campaign by Recycle Across America, which has headquarters in Minnesota. Their campaign uses multiple platforms to educate all Americans on how to recycle correctly. Onto the Southeast region, we have Student Ambassadors for Virginia's Environment, also known as the SAVE program, run by Keep Virginia Beautiful. Their campaign focuses on high schoolers and their recycling habits. They educate and create better recycling habits among those students. Then, the Recycle Right NC campaign, run by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. They aim to educate the public on recycling in North Carolina through using social media toolkits, which are a bunch of infographics available to the public. Next is Trash or Treasure by Rubicon. Their campaign focuses on recycling candy wrappers during holiday times. Lastly, the campaigns in the Northeast. The first one is Recycle Right, done by the Northeast Resource Recovery Association, which is based in New Hampshire. Their campaign was a social media campaign for their residents and to produce or improve recycling habits among them. Next, we have the Recycle Everything campaign from the New York City government. It was an ad campaign that promoted recycling and announced an expansion of an organic food waste recycling program for Manhattan. Finally, we have the Recycling is Real campaign run by the Plastics Industry Company, which is based in Washington, D.C. Their campaign was a collection of videos showing workers in recycling factories around America and sharing their stories to support their claim that recycling is real. Before we get into a deep dive analysis, comparing and contrasting, and synthesis of the data that I collected, I have a poem that I wrote and would like to read. It is titled Recycle, Silly Goose, and is in the format of a haiku. Recycle? Sure thing. Don't be a silly goose. We can do our part. Thank you. Thank you. No flash photography, please. Back to it though. For this research, I contacted someone that has taken part in some capacity to each campaign and interviewed those who I could. I ended up being able to interview people associated with the campaigns for 10 out of the 15 campaigns, which I was very happy with. Everyone that I interviewed was a joy to either talk to on the phone or to email. To start, I am going to be discussing the topics of misinformation and disinformation. Lai Ma in the article, The Role of Scholarly Communication in Combating Disinformation and Misinformation in 2024 wrote, quote, disinformation refers to information that is purposefully misleading or non-existent or distorted data meant to deceive and manipulate, whereas misinformation refers to information that is uncertain and not entirely accurate but given without the intent to mislead or deceive, unquote. In science communication, these topics are very important because they can negatively affect so much of society and lead to lower trust levels of science in any realm. The main topic that kept coming up was how there is a lot of misinformation around the US on what can and can't be recycled. I'm going to start this section off with a quote by Trevor Denton from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality with the campaign Biggest Reducer. Trevor says, quote, the biggest miscommunication around recycling is what can be recycled and what can't. So instead of just going over the rules of what can or can't go in the blue bin, we wanted to encourage people to think ahead, unquote. What we think might be recyclable could be or could not be, depending on where our recycling is going. And it's already so interesting because where I live, recycling is in a green bin and waste goes in a blue bin. Whereas even a few cities away from me and a few states away from me, it's the opposite. All of these campaigns have some form of a goal to educate and combat misinformation about recycling. Otherwise, there wouldn't need to be so many campaigns on recycling. And while recycling is a concept that is overall more complex than just putting paper and plastic in a bin, we live in a day and age where that is a reality for a lot of Americans. Yet the amount of campaigns shows that it's a harder concept to have every person educated on correctly. Another form of misinformation that was brought up was misleading symbols. Here is a snippet from Sarah Pierpont from Recycle New Mexico with the Taking Action on Plastic Waste campaign.
And a lot of that is actually intentional, as much as that is not a fun thing to realize or admit, but it's mainly because there's no requirements, the little recycling chasing arrow triangle, that anything can have that on there. There's no requirement to mean what that means.
Misinformation around recycling is already quite bad. But then when there is disinformation about one of the most identifiable recycling symbols, that has major societal effects. It adds to the amount of people that don't realize that what they have might not actually be recyclable. It also makes recycling so much more confusing for a person to get involved in. Unless a person is willing to put in some time and effort to learn more about recycling, it is going to be hard to change the misinformation and disinformation that has already spread. Another aspect of that is brought up by Candy Zion from Recycle Montana with the Recycle Trailer Funding Campaign. Candy wrote, quote, "There are no good reporting stats from solid waste or recyclers. Any number stating what is recycled here in Montana is by guessing," unquote. It's difficult to track recycling if the systems and policies haven't been set up to do so, but even in rural places throughout the US, citizens should not have to base their recycling habits off of an educated guess of numbers. Luckily, these campaigns are combating that. That, unfortunately, doesn't stop the butterfly or domino effect that has already happened surrounding mis- and disinformation. Before I get onto my last topic relating to misinformation and disinformation, I want to do a highlight for some of the individuals that so graciously let me interview them. The first person that I am going to be talking about is Andrea Folsom. Andrea worked in the Recycle Right campaign with the Northeast Resource Recovery Association and was the communications coordinator. She was basically the creator of the whole campaign and deserves a lot of credit for that. I had the privilege to interview her over the phone, and just from our almost hour-long interaction, I could tell she is a lovely person to work with in any capacity. For her campaign, she had to research recycling for months, and even though the campaign is ended, she still sounds so passionate about it. You will be hearing snippets from her later, but she is such a fervent person and she is very good at her job. Another person that I wanted to highlight is Lily Roseback, who is a marketing intern from the SAVE program with Keep Virginia Beautiful. She was kind enough to answer my questions and answer them from her marketing standpoint, which made all of them really interesting to read compared to the other answers that I obtained. The final topic that I'm going to discuss surrounding mis- and disinformation is the disinformation that materials are not actually being recycled. Steve Kotz from Iowa State University with the Boss Your Toss campaign wrote, quote, "Some of the disinformation that came to our tabling events was the understanding that recycling doesn't happen. All waste is sent to the incinerator or the landfill," unquote. It generally is crazy to think that someone would share disinformation while knowing it could affect even a few people's habits or mindsets. In recycling, this kind of disinformation makes some people who hear that and believe it lose interest in recycling as a whole. Jessica Ruse from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment for the Keep It Clean Kansas campaign states, quote, "I know there have been news stories and concerns from individuals that their recycling is going to the landfill and it's discouraging," unquote. Disinformation has the power to do such negative domino effects on society. It is usually harder to know or be able to prove if something is disinformation compared to misinformation, but that doesn't erase the fact that they are both negatively affecting talk around recycling. Campaigns and educating more people are attempting to combat that, but it will be very difficult to get all or even a majority of society to be interested enough to learn more and learn correct information. The recycling industry changes a lot. It has improvements and it has expansions, but if a person isn't interested enough or won't change their habits, then campaigns like all of these won't be working to their best ability. Discussing misinformation and disinformation in a campaign additionally helps the organization or government in being able to gain more respect and trust by those who view it. Again, another domino effect within mis- and disinformation. If residents see that a campaign is being run about a topic that they are passionate about or that they want to know more about, and they see that misinformation is being corrected, then they are much more likely to look at what other campaigns have been run or look into similar campaigns. It intrigues a viewer to dive deeper than what, for instance, the infographic of a campaign shows or what caught their eye in the first place. The next science communication concepts that I will be talking about are integrity and ethics. In Strategic Science Communication by John C. Besley and Anthony Dudo, it says, quote, "We highlight throughout this book the importance of making ethical strategic communication choices. To start, we hope readers agree that it is more ethical to communicate in ways that encourage deeper processing rather than relying on the biased or heuristic reasoning that can arise when people lack the motivation or ability to process, unquote. Later in the book, it discusses a research project where many scientists were surveyed, and it also says, quote, "The scientists we have surveyed seem quite open to prioritizing communication aimed at ensuring that people see them as having integrity. We are, therefore, not shy about encouraging science communicators to consider devoting time or space to making sure those with whom they are communicating perceive the scientific community as trustworthy." Unquote. I talked about that a bit before with misinformation. Trust between the majority of society and scientists is important for science communication to be effective. For it to be effective, there has to be integrity within science communication that is already happening. Bringing it back to the first quote that I said, a part of ethics has to do with letting people come to their own conclusions, but guiding them by informing them to the best of your abilities. It deals a bit with biases, and it can be hard, but is possible to find a mid-ground between informing and getting some agenda across, especially being able to explain why you as a communicator, and a science communicator specifically, are saying what you are saying helps ethics to be more involved in your own communication and brings it into the discussion. Before I continue into my main topics relating to ethics and integrity, I am going to highlight a few more of the folks that I got the pleasure of interviewing. The first is Candy Zion. She was the first person that I got to interview and is the executive director for Recycle Montana. She responded very quickly to all of my emails and was very helpful with all of her answers. The second person that I want to highlight is Steve Kautz, who is the Recycling Services and Special Events Coordinator for Facilities Planning Management at Iowa State University. He is such an inspiration to me, to be honest. His work with this campaign and the amount of text that he sent me shows me just how much effort has gone into it and how much effort he puts into his job. He also called me Miss Allie, which made me feel fancy, so that definitely gave him some brownie points. Back to ethics and integrity, there were two main commonalities that I found. The first is in relation to being transparent and citing sources within the campaigns. Jessica Ruiz from the Keep It Clean Kansas campaign writes, quote, "Anytime we use any kind of data in our campaign, we cite the sources. Being transparent is important because it helps us build a relationship with our audience." Unquote. I really liked the emphasis of relationships in that quote and how it is a driving factor for the integrity of their company. Being able to build and maintain that relationship by showing reliability and honesty again and again is a way to set up scientific communication for success. In almost an opposite light, Alex Bunker from Recycle Across America from the Let's Recycle Right campaign says, quote, "In our experience, we have seen some large nonprofits claiming to work on recycling, but they take substantial funding from industries that benefit when recycling fails," unquote. Being able to identify when situations like this arise and inform on it is a big ethical decision. It could have major consequences, both negative and positive, for any science communicator and is a good reminder as to why ethics and integrity is important and is a big part of science communication. The next commonality that I found was dealing with mistakes in an ethical way. Katie Kinnear from Rubicon with the Trash or Treasure campaign says, quote, "We will always consider the ethics of communicating clearly and honestly. There have been times when the campaign has had some hiccups, but we work hard to fix any mistakes and make sure the campaign is fun, easy, and accessible to all our audiences." Unquote. Along those same lines, here is a snippet from Andrea Folsom with the Northeast Resource Recovery Association.
When we were running it, there was one of those, like, the decimal was off kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we got, like, a huge number. It looked like this one town, by recycling aluminum, it was the equivalent of removing, like, 200,000 cars from the road for a year, which is just way out of line. Like, it'd be amazing, but just out of line. We pulled it, we reran the numbers, recreated the graphic, put the new graphic up there, and then we let folks know from that town. You know, like in a previous stated post, it said this, our bad. After running the numbers, it's actually this. Mistakes happen. I think that people will respect you more and have more trust in you if you openly are willing to say, like, oops, I messed up.
Being able to own up to mistakes is something that is applicable to every single human on this planet. When the mistake has potential impact on people, which is a lot of instances for science communication, being able to deal with that in an ethical way is extremely important. Like Andrea brought up, it affects trust between a viewer and a speaker, or a society and a science communicator. Before I continue on to the next science communication concept, when interviewing everyone, I asked a few research questions that were fun, and I am very excited to share with you the data that I collected from those questions. I believe that doing this was extremely interesting because of how similarly or differently people in similar fields answered certain questions. The first part of the data revolved around one thing that each person did in their free time. There ended up being a majority winner. 8 out of 10 people discussed multiple hobbies or activities related to nature or the outdoors. One person talked about crocheting, and another talked about spending time with friends and family. It is interesting to think about a potential connection between the career fields by these chosen individuals and their leisure activities. A person will most likely get into a job that is associated with recycling because of their values and love for the planet. So it makes sense that so many would spend a lot of time outdoors. Since I am the best host ever, I am going to make you wait a bit for the, in my opinion, funnest data that I collected from this project. The next science communication concept is jargon. Zane Dayton and Marko Dragicevic in Effects on Jargon and Source Accent on Receptivity to Science Communication 2023 write, quote, "Science communication often contains complex language, particularly jargon or technical specialized vocabulary. Compared to non-jargon, jargon can disrupt people's processing fluency or the subjective ease or difficulty people experience processing information." Unquote. Jargon can be something that brings together a group or separates them if used inefficiently. If a target audience, for instance, all were doctors, then jargon within the medicine industry would likely be used and well received. Whereas if an audience was full of college students, then medical jargon would likely be either not used or explained. Within the science communication realm, jargon can have an effect on how the speaker is perceived, how the information is perceived, and if the viewer will take further action. Not being able to understand a speaker or grasp a concept because of jargon usage is frustrating for everyone. The first similarity for jargon was for different types of materials. In the Recycling is Real videos by the plastics industry, the videos discuss jargon like film plastics, polyethylene, or polypropylene without elaborating on what that means. That has potential negative consequences because they might lose the interest and attention from many viewers. Another example is in the Recycle Right and See campaign by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Their campaign discusses jargon like single-use and ceramic items in relation to recycling. However, they explain what those terms mean in the infographics. It is a similar situation for the Don't Ignite, Recycle Right campaign by the Boulder County Hazardous Materials Management Facility as well, except for battery types, such as lithium and alkaline batteries. If you have to use jargon for a campaign, one of the best ways to go about it is to explain rather than assume the majority of people will understand. It can be tricky when trying to find a way to not underestimate the knowledge of the audience while still giving enough information so that everyone can stay on the same page. The next topic is simply leaving out jargon. This is a tactic that is used mainly depending on the target audience. Like the example prior, if you're a doctor giving an educational speech to other doctors, then it would be acceptable to use some jargon since everyone would have a basic understanding of medical knowledge. However, most of these campaigns have target audiences of people in the same state, students, families, and just in general everyone, which means that this would be the tactic to use for these campaigns. Alex Bunker from the Let's Recycle Right campaign said, quote, "We do our best to keep our language clear for the public, either using terms that might be more familiar or explaining what the terms are," unquote. Again, just re-emphasizing the purpose behind this tactic and the addition of explaining what jargon means when necessary. Another quote that I have is from Trevor Denton with the Biggest Reducer campaign. Quote, "One of my communications program priorities is to catch and filter out jargon in our external messages. However, JB, the recycling coordinator, is a great public presenter and does a great job of avoiding jargon when speaking to public audiences," unquote. Public presentations are done a lot in science communication, so it is really important to be like this and communicate effectively to the audience by not using jargon or too complex language. Before I get onto the last topic of jargon, I'm going to do a couple more highlights for people. The first is Jessica Ruiz. Jessica is the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. For that position, Jessica is basically everywhere doing or helping with everything within the online and in-person realm for the department, which is very respectable and was very professional and straightforward. I am actually a Kansas Jayhawks fan, so anytime I get the chance to talk to anyone from Kansas, I am taking that opportunity. The next person that I want to highlight is Cassidy Campbell. Cassidy led the campaign Know What to Throw. The campaign looked super fun and even had a mascot, Carter the Recycling Cart. Cassidy responded quickly, and I enjoyed the passion about the environment that I saw in the answers. That was very refreshing to see. Back to it. The other common topic related to jargon is the different kinds of recycling. A big part of how an area recycles is how populated it is. Andrea Folsom from the Recycle Right campaign talks about this and explains it very well.
Source separated recycling, and so for me, when I go to do my recycling, I go to our local transfer station. Some places call it a recycling center, although I can also throw my trash away there. And I physically separate my aluminum cans from my glass, from my number 1 plastic, from my number 2 plastic. So people are doing all of the separating on their own, opposed to like a single stream or a dual stream recycling. Single stream is you're putting all of your recyclables into one bin. Oftentimes that has like a curbside pickup aspect to it. And dual stream is separating out your bottles, tubs, and jugs, whether it's glass or cans or plastic, from like your paper and cardboard.
There is just so much jargon that I wish we had time for. That could be a podcast on its own, and just in general, going over jargon could be a podcast on its own. Recycling can look different in its language or jargon from one city to another. There is basic jargon that the majority of people in the recycling industry would know, but if someone has lived in a populated city their whole life and has really only known that, then source-separated recycling might be something they wouldn't know about. Another interesting piece of jargon has to do with a different kind of recycling, almost imaginary recycling. Steve Kotz with the Boss Your Toss campaign writes, quote, "When they started recycling, wishful recycling began to creep into the bins. Hoping that something recycles and doesn't is a contaminant. So we added the term, if in doubt, toss it out," unquote. Wishful recycling got brought up a few times while I interviewed everyone, and it is such an interesting concept. Putting something that isn't recyclable in the recycling can have negative consequences, but that is what these campaigns are trying to prevent and educate on. Campaigns are useful in making this term something of the past, if done effectively. Hopefully, the more people educated on certain topics will lead to less of a need for so many campaigns and even more accessible information. One thing from my data that I found interesting was that the 2 least answered questions were about integrity/ethics and jargon. The jargon answers really surprised me because recycling has so much jargon associated within the industry. However, to run a campaign for general information, it is not needed. So I, at the same time, understand why it wasn't such a big part of the campaigns. I did believe that it would have been one of the bigger topics that I was going to talk about, but a strategy in science communication is to avoid jargon so that the majority of your target audience will understand. It is one of those situations where if you are able to explain it to a 5-year-old, then you have the concept of what you are talking about down. The next science communication concept that I will be going over is warmth. Warmth is all about being able to show humanity through science communication. It is a stereotype that scientists are very cold and very factual, but by using warmth, communication can be a lot more impactful. I am definitely going to butcher this name, but Alton Muller et al. In Science Communication Gets Personal: Ambivalent Effects of Self-Disclosure in Science Communication on Trust in Science writes, quote, "Trustworthiness perceptions are rooted both in competence-related as well as warmth-related judgments. Thus, to be perceived as trustworthy, it is not enough to present oneself as highly skilled and professional," unquote. This is a concept, like the quote said, that is combined with other concepts to get an audience to pay attention to what is being said and to trust it. There were 2 recurring topics for this concept. The first one is showing warmth through language. The campaigns were done in different formats, but all of them had some form of written language associated with them. Katie Kinnear from the Trash or Treasure campaign wrote, quote, "We try to include humor and fun where we can, and all our communications are as personal as possible. It is hard with a lean team, but we want participants to know there is a human on the other side of the email, happy to be collaborating with them and grateful that they are inspiring their community to recycle," unquote. Especially for community-driven campaigns, warmth is so important to make a community feel heard and to have them be interested in what you are trying to communicate. A connectedness within a community can really be shown through using warmth. Another campaign where this was important was for the Recycle Everything campaign. The NYC government website writes about how during the announcement of the campaign, Mayor Bloomberg states, quote, "The Recycle Everything ad campaign and the expansion of our organic food waste recycling program shows how far New York has come in managing the 11,000 tons of waste generated every day," unquote. That connects New Yorkers and gives them a sense of pride in being connected to one another. Before I move on to the next topic related to warmth, it is time for another highlight section. The first person that I want to highlight is Sarah Pierpont from Recycle New Mexico. Sarah was one of the folks that I interviewed on the phone and was a joy to interview. As I was doing a bit more research, I learned that Sarah had also been on a different podcast, the Resilient New Mexico podcast, which is so cool. Definitely check that out if you want to learn more specifically about recycling in New Mexico. The next person I want to highlight is Katie Kinnear from Rubicon with the Trash or Treasure campaign. She was lovely to interview, and I'm very glad that I got to interview her because she was someone who started the Trash or Treasure campaign. I could really sense her passion about the program, and it is such a unique program that hearing all of her answers was interesting because their focus isn't recycling in general, but rather for items like candy wrappers. Back to warmth, though, on a similar note from before, another aspect of warmth has to do with the art, colors, and photography of the campaigns. For the Trash Talk series website, immediately you see a colorful image of a person with plastic all around them. It is immediately catching the viewer's attention while showing the humanity of the campaign. The colorful image is combating the stereotypes that I discussed earlier, and It is marketing this campaign so that people feel like they could relate and not feel looked down upon. Another use of this is brought up by Cassidy Campbell with the Know What to Throw campaign. Quote, "We used a cute recycling cart graphic, Carter, as our mascot for the campaign, and he is featured in many of our ads." Unquote. Something as simple as a graphic, like described, can be helpful in making an audience feel more trust and compassion for a campaign. With photos, graphics, and fun colors, a story can be told. The recycling cart graphic can have a backstory, go on adventures, and learn about recycling. That is really a prime example of showing warmth because it lets the audience see that work has been put in to show that they don't just want to bombard them with texts about recycling. The final science communication concept that I will be going over is actually a combination of two: risks and benefits and strategy methods. I chose to combine these two because the strategy methods used tended to have effects on the risks that were done in the campaigns. In Attitude Change, when presenting science museum visitors with risk-benefit information, Phelan et al. Writes, quote, "Conflicting topics are often presented in the form of pros and cons or risks and benefits, as this can help curators to present a more balanced view." Unquote. While that quote is for museums, it is applicable to both scientists and audiences. Risks and benefits help everyone to see topics or research in a more neutral way. When dealing with topics that have biases and educating others on that, it is really important to see information from multiple perspectives. Before I get into the next section though, the time has come for our final few highlights. We have Trevor Denton from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and the Biggest Reducer campaign. He is the communications program manager and answered all of my questions very fast. Since I'm getting my degree in communications, it was really interesting to hear about the campaign from his position. Next, we have Alex Bunker from Recycle Across America for the Let's Recycle Right campaign. She gave me so much good information and led me to so many other campaigns that Recycle Across America did. Her knowledge on Recycle Across America is so respectable because she could link almost each of my questions to a separate activity, campaign, photo shoot, whatever else Recycle Across America had done that would be applicable to the question. It truly shows how much effort she puts into her job and how much passion she has for sharing her work with others. The first commonality for strategy, methods, and risks and benefits is to have a way to measure success and risks/benefits. Being able to have some kind of measurement for a campaign is important because it helps both the communities and the workers see how far the campaign has come and what could be improved upon. Sarah Pierpont with Recycle New Mexico says,
"Well, yeah, we always measure our success and measure our projects and try and have a way to evaluate programs to see what does work and what doesn't work."
Having that ability of measurement lets the leaders of the campaign weigh the risks and benefits more efficiently, especially after taking any measurements. That can show risks of new aspects to a campaign or benefits of what they did in the campaign so that they can do it again. A specific example of this happening is shown by Candy Zion from the Recycle Trailer Funding campaign. She writes, quote, "Risks are possibly in the handling of materials and the benefits are keeping stuff out of the environment," unquote. Handling materials for a campaign is something that can be tracked, and the amount of waste a campaign helps with or produces can also be measured. It helps them to visibly see how successful the campaign is in that aspect. Before we get to the last section, now is the moment you all have been waiting for, the funnest information I was able to collect. I asked all of my interviewees what their favorite meal is, and I had some very interesting and unique responses. Firstly, I generalized all of the responses I got, and dinner won, but that is not the most interesting part, but good to know. I gave them 3 options, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, yet almost everyone gave unique responses, some with certain foods and some with certain times. One of the main responses that weren't on my list was brunch, and I have a very important message from Andrea Folsom from the Recycle Right campaign.
Yeah. Brunch, actually.
Brunch.
Love brunch. Who doesn't love brunch?
It's true.
Yeah, if you don't love brunch, you cannot be trusted.
Another main response that wasn't on my list was breakfast for dinner, which is really interesting. I loved seeing how multiple people in the recycling industry gave similar unique responses to this question. Going back to the last section though, the other aspect of risks/benefits with strategy methods is how models for campaigns make less risks. Lily Roseback from the SAVE program wrote, quote, "All SAVE activities involve Keep America Beautiful's 5-step behavior change model. Get the facts, prioritize the behavior, develop and implement an action, evaluate impact, and provide feedback," unquote. This model involves feedback and evaluation, that is helping the organizations to be able to lessen the risks during and after campaigns have been run. It has made it trackable to see the risks. Cassidy Campbell from the Know What to Throw campaign says, quote, "Our messaging was short and to the point. Since attention spans have decreased, our ads used minimal words and clear language to make it as easy to understand and digest as possible," unquote. By having a set model to have short messages, less risks are taken and less mistakes can happen. Less misinformation is possible and more concise information can be shared. I want to leave you, the listeners, with a call to action as I am wrapping this podcast up. If you have the time and energy, research your city's recycling guidelines and use that to create positive recycling habits. We're trying to live on this planet as long as possible, and giving it back some respect will be worth it in the long and short run. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great morning, midday, or evening. I have a little blooper reel after this, and I hope you enjoy that. Bye! Their campaign was a social... Let's not say that. Information. I'm gonna re-say that because I said that in the wrong tone. I can read. Can I? Yes, I can. Well, redo. Especially for community. Why can't I say the word community? What is going on? That is my cat, Atticus.